Amen. I want to start off by looking at John chapter 20, verse 30 and 31. John chapter 20, verse 30 and 31. Because John tells us the reason why Jesus performed miracles. John chapter 20, 30 and 31. Truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of His disciples which are not written in this book. That, of course, would include the miracles that John didn't record that are found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And the ones that they didn't record as well. Verse 31. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in His name. Here's the reason why we have not only the teachings of Jesus in the gospel accounts, but also we have the miracles recorded. Those miracles are recorded, written down for us, so that we might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that believing in Him, we might have life in His name. Believing, always in the Bible, means doing what He says, obeying His will. So that's the purpose of the miracles. Jesus came and not only spoke the truth, not only taught in parables, as we've already seen, but He verified that He was from God by the miracles that He performed. Now, as we look on page 57, there under introduction, it says, on the day of Pentecost, Peter said, hear these words, Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested by God to you by miracles. Attested means proven by God to you by miracles. The miracles were the proof that He was who He claimed to be. So that's why we are studying the concept of miracles. First of all, we've got to get a definition of miracles. A definition of miracles. A miracle is a supernatural act of God over and above natural laws. Therefore, the Lord's virgin birth was a miracle, whereas the birth of our children is not. Miracles have also been defined as a given, transcendent, supernatural act of God's power, according to this man's definition. It's not natural, it's supernatural. It's something that is beyond natural. It cannot happen in nature. And we know God created nature by a miracle. Genesis chapter 1 talks about the creation in 6 days. That was a miracle. He started nature with a miracle. But natural law then took over. When we're talking about with a miracle, we're talking about God doing something above and beyond natural law or suspending natural law. The way the word miracle is used today is simply not the way the Bible uses the word miracle. People talk about the miracle of childbirth. And it is wonderful to see your children being born into the world. It's a glorious thing. It's a wonderful thing. It's a marvelous thing. But it's not a miracle. Not according to the Bible. People talk about how that they found something that they thought they lost and they found it years later. They describe it as a miracle. Even in the news, they'll talk about a miraculous rescue or someone surviving a crash. It was a miracle they survived. That is how the modern speech uses miracle, but that is not miraculous. Those things are not miraculous. When we talk about providence today, when we are praying for God to heal the sick, be with us, protect us, be with us as we travel, be with us as we live for Him, we are asking God to, within the laws He created, providentially watch over and protect us. Naturally, within the natural realm. Miracles are supernatural. They had a purpose and they had an ending. The ending was at the end of God's will being completely given, 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We don't have time to go into that, but by the time the New Testament was completely written, the miracles would end. Because with a miracle comes revelation. It's two sides of the same coin. If you have miracles, you have a new revelation. When the miracles stop, the new revelation stops, and vice versa. So what Jesus did was miraculous. The designation of these miracles, they were called miracles, of course, John 3, because they were done supernaturally. They were also called mighty works, Luke 10, because they were demonstrating a divine power, John 9. Wonders, they were called in John 4 because of the reaction that they prompted, Luke 4. And signs, John 3, because they signified He was divine. A sign points to something else. It points to something else. And so the miracle was a sign pointing to Jesus that He was the Son of God. It was not an end of itself. It was for a purpose to point to Him and His message and His life. So they had a purpose. They didn't just happen so that people could have a better life. And that's the way people think that God does today. They pray for God to be with them and give them miracles and signs and wonders just simply because it will enhance their life. That's not the purpose of miracles in the Bible. Because not everyone in the Bible who was sick or injured got miraculously healed. We see that with the Apostle Paul. When he had a thorn in the flesh, whatever it may have been, it might have been a physical ailment, God said He was not going to take that away from him. Epaphroditus was left sick. He was not miraculously healed. He was written about being sick. And he eventually got well through natural means, through prayer. But a miracle is something that had a purpose in mind. It was a sign. It was God's stamp of approval that whoever's speaking, whether it be Jesus or the apostles who had authority, were speaking God's will. Then you have the classification of miracles, what they covered. It showed Christ's power over disease, Mark chapter 2. He could heal any disease there was. Any disease that existed, He could heal it. Over the demons, Luke chapter 8. God allowed these demons, these unclean spirits, whatever they might have been, there's a lot of mystery there concerning their origin. He allowed these unclean spirits, these demons, to possess people in the first century while Jesus was on earth for the purpose of Jesus demonstrating His power over the devil and casting them out. And by the way, I do not believe that demon possession takes place today. I believe the devil tempts. I believe there's mental illness, and mental illness mixed with sinful behavior can result in all kinds of problems. But as far as demon possession, you would have to have miraculous gifts to get rid of those demons. Those miraculous gifts do not exist in the church today. A lot of that is a lot of what you see in TV and movies, as far as the Catholic Church, exorcisms, things like that. That's just fairy tale. That's just mythology. It's not biblical. So He had power over the demons. Of course, He had power over death. John chapter 11. He resurrected Lazarus from the dead. And anytime Jesus went to a funeral, He interrupted the funeral by raising the dead. He always interrupted funerals when He went to them by raising the one who had died. He had power over nature. He could calm the storm. He could walk on water. He had power over the natural elements. He had the power over material elements. He could multiply bread and fishes for a multitude of people. That doesn't happen naturally. That was a supernatural activity. Now there are those, it's not here in the book, but there are those who are scholars, so to speak, in these seminaries, that teach certain denominational groups. They say, oh, we can believe in Jesus, we can believe in His teachings, but we don't have to really believe in His miracles. We don't have to really believe those things actually happened. Well, if you're going to deny the miracles, by what standard are you going to believe the teachings? It's in the same book. You start denying the miracles of Jesus, that they actually happened, and try to give a naturalistic explanation to them, and say that they weren't miracles, then why would you believe any of His teachings? Why believe any of them? It becomes a pick and choose type of situation. Page 58. The characteristic of Jesus' miracles. And now this is very interesting because it's in contrast with what people call miracles today. Just down the road here on 30, there was a tent revival. And that tent revival said, I think it had a sign that said, expect a miracle, or something about a miracle. You're supposed to go there and there's supposed to be miracles that happen. But you compare what they call miracles with what the Bible actually calls miracles and what actually happened, there's a huge contrast. Contrary to claimed miracles of today, Jesus' miracles were performed in the presence of people. Acts 2:22. Attested to you by miracles. Jesus said on one time, I didn't do anything in a corner. What He did was open. He was not in some tent revival as some con artist. He was out in the open. If you would put it in a modern day type of setting, Jesus in the middle of Walmart would heal someone. If He was at a restaurant, He would heal someone. It was open. It was public. It took place instantly. Mark chapter 2 and verse 12. Immediately, instantaneously, the miracle would take place. He wouldn't say, now I've healed you, now you go to the doctor and you spend some 2 or 3 weeks in bed rest, and then after that you take all the medicine and you get well after that time, then we'll say that's a miracle. That's not a miracle. A miracle was an instantaneous, miraculous activity. It happened instantaneously. It involved healing both the lame, the crippled, and the maimed, which would include amputees. Matthew chapter 15 and verse 30. People that you could actually see, they have an injury. Now, isn't it very interesting if you ever watch these false prophets on TV who claim miracles? It's no injury that can be seen on camera. It's always something internal that can't be seen, cannot be verified. Cancer, hernia, lung problems. But you never see a guy coming out there with no arm, and all of a sudden that arm miraculously grows back. You don't see that. In fact, those people in that controlled environment are weeded out. They're taken out of the lineup because they don't want them to go up on stage. So it's a bunch of charlatans, fake healers, not faith healers, fake healers. They could actually see the injury be healed. It resulted in people being healed completely and wholly. Matthew chapter 9 and verse 22. Complete healing. I was talking to one of these Pentecostal preachers one time, and we were talking about healing, and he said, "You see this scar right here on my face?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I put my hand on it. I cut it the other day doing some work, and I put my hand on it, and I prayed, and God healed it." I said, "Well, there's still a scar there." It wasn't healing. He put pressure on his face and it stopped the bleeding, and the body, through its natural processes, is healing it. You could still see there was a scar there. Not when a miracle of the Bible took place. It was complete. It was holy. Complete healing. They were beyond dispute, Acts 2:22. Were performed without the faith of the subject, John chapter 5. Mark chapter 2, there are some instances. Now, there were some instances where Christ did say, if you have faith and believe, this can happen. But there were other instances when he did not. So this excuse that the Pentecostals come up with and say, you have to have faith for this to work, it's just not biblical. There's numerous examples of people who didn't have faith that were healed and that caused people to believe. Sometimes those miracles were not broadcast. They were done in secret. Matthew 8 and verse 4. Some things that were not to be broadcast at that time until they were going to be written down. Involved the accurate unveiling of the future. He told precisely, and we studied this in Matthew chapter 24, about what would happen in 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem. And history tells us that's exactly what happened. They could not be duplicated. John chapter 11 and Matthew chapter 8 were performed in a realm where they could be appraised. Luke chapter 22. He did it in front of everybody, his critics and his followers. And we're at times all-encompassing. Matthew chapter 4 and verse 23. So these factors or these characteristics of Jesus' miracles are far different from what people call miracles today. He would do it openly in front of everyone to see. Something that is not done today at all. Any questions or comments before we go any further? The genuineness of Jesus' miracles. The credibility of the Bible cannot be denied. The evidence sustaining such being overwhelming. Hence, the miracles recorded therein cannot be denied. The Bible is history. What it records is the life of Christ, and in that life of Christ we read about His miracles. There are no signs of fraud or trickery with Jesus at all. An impostor would seek all the publicity possible, but Jesus forbade people to tell about some of His miracles in Matthew 9 and verse 30. An impostor would seek to enhance the value of miracles, but Jesus said that there were greater works, preaching and converting people, in John chapter 14, verses 11 through 12. Every attack against them has been answered. Even as enemies admitted they actually happened. Celsus is a 2nd century person. Julian the Apostate in 361 AD. These were people who wrote, who were not followers of Christ, but they wrote about what he did as far as doing miracles. That they actually happened. Now, they probably dismissed them as not being real miracles, but they talked about him being a miracle worker. Writers of secular history gave credence to the miracles of Jesus. Justin, who was born in 110 AD, and then Tertullian in 145 to 220 AD, they write about his miracles. So it's not only the Bible, it's these other writers outside the Bible who are saying Jesus did these miracles. The witnesses and their testimony to Christ's miracles pass the test of accepted evidence, number, credibility, and motive. So we see here that what they saw and what they attest to prove conclusively that what we find in the Bible is actually true. When you look at John chapter 21, John chapter 21, verse 24 and 25, John says, "This is the disciple who testifies of these things," talking about himself. He wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true. And there are many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. So not even everything Jesus did was written down. What we need to know was given. Enough evidence was given in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to produce faith in the honest truth seeker. But people often want to know, what was he like as a teenager? What did he do in this situation? What did he do? That's just curiosity. We don't need to know those facts. What we need to know has been revealed to us, and that's enough to produce faith that He is who He claimed to be. Now, turn to John chapter 2. We're going to look at the very first miracle that Jesus performed. Now, of course, there were miracles associated with His conception, with Him coming into the world. That was a miracle. Born of a virgin. That doesn't happen naturally. And so we have that miracle, of course. But this is what He does in His earthly ministry. John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. As you look on page 59 of the study guide, an overview of the text, what we're going to see in John is we're going to see the turning of water into wine, John 2, the healing of the nobleman's son, John 4, the healing of a lame man, John 5, the feeding of the 5,000, John 6, the walking on water, John 6, the healing a man born blind, John 9, and then the raising of Lazarus from the dead, John chapter 11. And that will encompass the 7 signs or 7 miracles that are found within the book of John. God chose John to pick out 7, 7 being a number of completion in Hebrew thought, and that was written for the purpose of highlighting those miracles. Whereas you have other material in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John's material is very unique. It's very different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke's. Those 3 overlap one another a lot in their teaching and in what they record. But John's material is very unique, and probably the reason why is because he was writing towards the end of the first century and giving some additional information that Matthew, Mark, and Luke did not give. And so the Holy Spirit chose him to reveal these things that we have in our New Testament. The first miracle, turning water into wine. John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. Let's begin in verse 1. On the 3rd day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now both Jesus and His disciples were invited to the wedding. And when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to Him, "They have no wine." Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to His servants, "Whatever He says to you, do it." Now let's stop right there and kind of analyze what's going on here. Jesus, in His ministry, He was not someone who was like John. John was what we would call a hermit. He was out in the wilderness, preaching to people, telling people to come to Him and be immersed in the Jordan, be baptized in the Jordan. Jesus' ministry, on the other hand, was social. He was among the people. He was invited to this wedding feast. And these feasts could last for several days. It wasn't like a wedding that lasts maybe an hour at best in our culture. They lasted for a very long time. His mother was there. And she came to Jesus and said, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me?" Now some may look at that and say, that's kind of disrespectful. But the term that He uses there for woman is, in the Greek, kind of the way we would say in English, ma'am. It's a sign of respect. It's not disrespectful what He said. "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour is not yet come." So He was making it clear that this issue is something that He was going to do on His own timetable. That Mary, as an influence over Him, He's now a grown adult. He has a mission to accomplish. His Father's will. His Father in heaven. Verse 5. Mother said to the servants, "Whatever He says to you, do it." That's a sermon right there. Whatever Jesus says to you, do it. Just do it. He's the Lord. Does He say be baptized? Do it. Does he say repent? Do it. That's a sermon right there. Whatever he says to you, do it. Verse 6. Now there were set there 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water, and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, draw some out, and now take it to the master of the feast. You see, Jesus wasn't the master of the feast, as it were, being the one heading up the feast. And they took it. Verse 9. When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom. And he said to him, every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now. That shows you what kind of quality it was. Good wine in the sense of being good, beneficial. Not alcoholic. Good wine. Verse 11. This beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested His glory, and His disciples believed in Him. So here's what you have as we look on page 59. The location, a wedding in Canaan, some 4 miles from Nazareth in Galilee. Those present, the couple, the servants, the feast master, the Jews, Jesus' mother, and His disciples. The need, they have no wine. The miracle was the changing some 180 gallons of water into good wine. That doesn't happen instantaneously. But in nature, it happens through a process. The rain falls, the vines have the roots, the water goes into the vineyard, the vines take in the water through the vines, grows into the clusters, they take them out to a wine press and they stop. There you have wine. Good wine. Not that which is condemned in the Old Testament, understanding there's different words for wine and different concepts in the ancient world. That happens naturally. But what Jesus did happened instantaneously. He turned water into good wine. 180 gallons of water into good wine. Filling the water pots to the brim and using the servant for distribution gave credibility to the miracle. The results of the miracle was designed to reveal Christ's glory, His power, which resulted in faith being produced. Now I want you to turn over here to page 63 that has a chart at the top that says the wine Jesus made was not intoxicant. In other words, what Jesus made was something that could not get you drunk. It was non-alcoholic. The word wine in our English means one thing. It has alcohol in it. In fact, to designate wine without alcohol, what do we have to say? Non-alcoholic wine. Because the word English and wine, it means alcoholic. In Old English, it didn't used to mean that. In Old English, the word had 2 definitions. One of them was grape juice. The other one was an intoxicant with alcohol in it. So even in our English usage of the word wine, it has changed over the years. The mistake people make is they see the word wine and they automatically think of the modern day definition of wine. And so they say, Jesus made wine, therefore I can drink beer. That's how they try to reason. Jesus made wine, therefore I can drink whiskey. Well, that is a foolish conclusion to come to, and a very erroneous conclusion to come to. And as we look at this chart here on page 63, the wine Jesus made was not an intoxicant. Otherwise, He would have practiced what was forbidden. Proverbs 23, verses 29 through 32 talks about the dangers of alcoholic wine. The dangers of wine and what it does. and how it gets people drunk. Jesus' first miracle was not producing something that would get people drunk and violate the Old Testament. He would not have done that. He would have been under his own curse. Habakkuk 2:15 talks about woe to him who gives his neighbor drink. And of course, in that context, there he's talking about them getting drunk. Woe to a person who gives his neighbor drink. That would have been a violation of God's will. He would have disqualified himself as an elder in his own church, 1 Timothy 3 and verse 3, which simply means an elder has to be free from wine. Why would he create something that later on he would say through the Holy Spirit an elder can't have? That doesn't make any sense. He would have resultantly allowed us to share intoxicants with our friends, and if we can share it, we can sell it, thus having our own liquor stores. And think about this, as we think about that concept. If he made intoxicating drink, that means, as Brother Winkler points out, we can produce it and sell it. That means we can open bars. But no one that I know of, very few people would want to take it that far. And I even asked one time a person who was trying to say Jesus made intoxicating wine. Wine means wine, and we just need to leave it as is. There's nothing wrong with having a drink of alcohol every now and then. And he goes to this particular denomination. I said, okay, the next time your denomination has a fellowship together, take beer to it. He said, no, I wouldn't do that. What? You wouldn't take wine to this fellowship? No, I wouldn't do that. Are you more righteous than Jesus? Because you're saying Jesus made intoxicating wine. But yet you are going to refuse to take wine to the fellowship? It's inconsistent how people are. He would have reflected on the purpose of the miracle. The supply of 180 gallons of an alcoholic beverage wherewith the participants could get drunk and have reflected on His glory rather than manifested such. 2, it is inaccurate to always associate the word wine, oinos, the Greek word, with that which is intoxicating. For example, the word sometimes means grape juice. Here are passages that denote that. Isaiah 16:10, Isaiah 68:8 talks about the wine in the cluster, still in the cluster. The context must determine its usage. Think about this. Jesus' purpose was to teach people. Why would He produce something that would hinder people from understanding His teaching? You can't teach someone who's drunk. And they'd already drank all the wine that was there. And notice this also, Brother Winkler didn't bring this out when we look at this. The master of the feast tasted it and says, this is the best. You should have put this out first. But if they had been drinking intoxicating wine all along, they would not have known what it tastes like, because when you drink it, it dulls your senses, intoxicating wine. Have you ever seen these TV shows where they have wine tasting, what do they call them? Contests, wine tasting contests. They taste the wine, they put it and they swish it around, they spit it in a bucket. Why do they spit it in the bucket? So they won't get drunk, so it won't dull their senses. Because if they swallowed every wine that they drank, that would dull their senses and they couldn't taste the rest of the wine. So they spit it out immediately and don't swallow it because they want to have their senses intact to be able to taste the other wines. Wine tasting contest, I think is what it's called. But this man knew when he tasted this is the best. Of course, Jesus does all things well. He doesn't halfway do something. Therefore, it was the best that he could taste. So that shows that they were not drinking alcoholic wine the whole time. So the very first miracle of Jesus would not be doing something that would be contrary to God's will. What the word wine means there in this context, oinos, means what we would call grape juice. And it's that simple. Any questions about that before we go any further? Let's look at John chapter 4. That miracle showed Jesus' power over the elements. He could change the molecular structure of water and turn it into grape juice or good wine. That showed His power and manifested His glory. John chapter 4, verses 46 through 54, we have the healing of the nobleman's son. Beginning in verse 46. So Jesus came again to Cana of Galilee, where He had made the water wine. And there was a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. When he had heard that Jesus had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to Him and implored Him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. And Jesus said to him, unless you people see signs and wonders, you will by no means believe. The nobleman said to him, Sir, come down before my child dies. Jesus said to him, Go your way, your son lives. So the man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him, and he went his way. Verse 51, and as he was now going down, his servant met him and told him, saying, Your son lives. He then inquired of them the hour when he got better. And they said, Yesterday, at the 7th hour, the fever left him. So the father knew that it was at that same hour in which Jesus said to him, Your son lives. And he himself believed, and his whole household. So again, we see here the purpose of this. And notice what Jesus said, unless you people see signs and wonders, you will by no means believe. Then He has this miracle take place. Then it says in verse 53, He himself believed and his whole household. It produced faith. It wasn't, if you believe, then I can do this. No, this will produce faith. That's exactly what we find. The location was Cana of Galilee. Those present, the nobleman, his son, Jesus, the nobleman's servant, and his household present, not being there in all the same location. That's not what Brother Winkler is talking about there. The son was at the point of death, and his father implored him to come down and heal the son. The miracle, your son lives. The boy was healed, and even though Jesus was 20 miles away from Capernaum, the nobleman's hometown, that boy was still healed. Jesus didn't have to lay hands on him. Also, the boy was healed at the exact hour Jesus had spoken the healing words. The result, faith, was produced. See, the miracles are producing the faith. That happened in John 2. He was glorified and his disciples believed in Him. This was producing faith. So we see here how that the miracles that Jesus performed, not even having to be in the presence of the person, not even having to physically make a contact with them. There were times when He would actually lay hands on some. But to pronounce a person healed over distances. You see that several times within the miracles of Jesus. That goes to show that there was no need for a physical contact for that to happen. And so Jesus is able to heal without making physical contact. This produced faith. They knew that it was the same hour in which Jesus had said, Your son lives. He believed, him and his household. We might have time for one more as we look at the third miracle, the healing of the lame man, John chapter 5, verses 1 through 18. After these after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to the Jerusalem. There is in Jerusalem at the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethsaida, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first, after the stirring of the water, was made well of whatever disease he had. Now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there in that condition a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I am coming, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Rise, take up your bed and walk." Notice, Jesus didn't say, if you believe, then you can be healed. He said, do you want to be healed? This man doesn't even know who Jesus is. We're going to see this in this context. And immediately, verse 9, the man was made well, took up his bed and walked, and that day was the Sabbath. The Jews therefore said to him, who was cured, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your bed." See, they didn't even care that he was healed. They were looking for something wrong so they could pin something on Christ. Verse 11, and he answered, "He who made me well said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.' And they asked him, 'Who is the man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" But the one who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in that place. He didn't know who Jesus was. So there was not some sort of faith that was required for this to happen. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you." What's a worse thing than being paralyzed? What would be worse? Losing your soul. There are some things worse, and losing your soul is one of them. The biggest thing, that's worse than being handicapped. That's worse than being paralyzed. A worse thing can come upon you. Verse 15. The man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. For this reason the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him because he had done these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered and said, "My Father has been working until now, and I have been working." Therefore the Jews sought all the more to kill him, because he not only broke the Sabbath, but also said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. Now, he did not break the Sabbath according to the law of Moses. He broke their concept of the Sabbath. And Jesus made that very clear, called God his Father, and they got the point of that too. He was making himself equal with God. He was equal with God. And they said, we need to kill him. We need to get rid of him. So that was the response of the people to a man that was paralyzed. Instead of rejoicing that this man who for 38 years had been in that condition, they said, "You can't carry your mat," what it would be, kind of a mat that you lay on. You can't carry that on the Sabbath. Missing the whole point of what Jesus did, so that they can find fault. Those were hard-hearted individuals. Next week we will take up our study in the miracles of Jesus. Continue reading pages 59 through the rest of the chapter here in this study guide, and we will talk more about the miracles of our Lord.